Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever in the world you may happen to be. You've tuned into Talk About Your Community. I'm Todd, your host. This show is brought to you by Clocktower Advisors, and we try to bring in all kinds of perspectives, ideas, and new voices into the conversation about building communities online, technology-mediated communities, as well as hybrid or even in-person communities. That relationship is fascinating in all of its aspects, and I'm glad you're here if you're here for the first time. Kalisa, let's roll the opening credits. Hello again, everybody, and welcome to the show. That was a fun opening there. Twitter fooled me at the opening of the stream, but that's okay. We continue to roll on here. Really glad you're able to tune in today. The Talk About Your Communities live stream show. We've done over 60, going on 70 episodes of this show, and if you're coming to us for the first time, really glad you're able to join. This is a live show because we like to have questions and interaction during the course of the event here, and would love for you to just jump in on the comments, say hello, tell us what's on your mind, and of course, as our guest, today we have Josh Fairfield on, and we'll bring him onto the screen here in just a second. To talk about extended reality, AR, VR, that world of technology and how it's going to be impacting and is already impacting the world of online communities. I do hope you'll be able to stick around for that and ask your questions. And if you're catching this on the replay after the event, we are always watching for comments and ideas and things that you want to share about that. And I try to respond to each and every person that replies. We live stream on LinkedIn as well as YouTube, and we'll see what the future of Twitter holds for us. We'll continue to push out to other platforms like Instagram in the future as well. So if you're tuning in on one of those outposts, welcome to you as well. But without any further ado, I want to bring on screen here my guest for today, Mr. Josh Fairfield. And Josh is the William D. Bain Family Professor of Law at Washington and Lee University School of Law. And Josh, your background is far-reaching when it comes to technologies. You specialize in digital property, electronic contracts, big data privacy, and of course, virtual communities, my favorite. And even getting into things like around cryptocurrencies, privacy protection. I just love your background and all the stuff you've done. We met a couple of months ago. Welcome to the show.
Well, thanks so much for having me on, Todd. It's been a great conversation so far. And yeah, virtual communities is where I started. Actually, that was the very root of everything I started working on. And so there's a lot of great overlap there.
Well, that's amazing. And I think you are probably the first person I've had on the show with a background in law. And so very interested in your perspectives and expertise around this whole act of virtual community building. Technology mediated connections between people, I think, are very important to culture and helping people to feel less lonely in the world. But there are implications around that, certainly both ethical and legal, for consideration. And I love that you think about these topics a lot. So I absolutely was excited to have you on the show today.
Well, thanks so much for having me.
Yeah. So I guess maybe to get started, tell me a little bit about what you just mentioned there a moment ago, that you got your start in virtual communities. What is it that originally got you excited about them, and what keeps you interested and excited about them?
Well, the answer to that is easy, which is we all live in a technology-seeded landscape, and yet we still seek home. We still seek environments and contexts, digital environments and digital contexts, but that have some of the same feature set that we have in real space. So for example, you and I are across the world right now, and yet what are we doing? We're getting together and we're talking face to face. We don't have to do that, right? But that drive, that human drive to be in direct contact with other people in an environment that's been reconstructed, that's deep. That's deep in our history as a species, and that's deep in our cultural history. And so when I got started, I started publishing in 2005, my virtual property on property systems in online communities. And that was because at that time, if people can throw their minds way back, at that time, people were really beginning to see the internet as more than text. They were beginning to describe the internet in pictures, which was virtual worlds and online communities built around huge games like World of Warcraft, EVE Online. And then there were other virtual environments that had nothing to do with games, like Second Life there, and so on and so forth. So that was the real first blossoming. And I think people forget how much those early environments shaped our present experience, because what they were calling virtual worlds back then, now we just call everyday life. We've to some degree lost track of how much virtual reality, augmented reality, extended are part, Google Maps, right, are part of our everyday existence now. And so that's what keeps me there. What keeps me there is the mainstreaming of these technologies. And back to what we originally said, the ways in which these technologies are supposed to connect us, but often, in fact, alienate us, keep us separate from each other. So, here I'll give you the example. Everybody's tried to move their love life online, and yet people find that those applications have an economic incentive to not connect them and keep them apart. The example that I give, it's not my example, but the example that I give for the social media context is Meta, Facebook. They could implement a button in 15 minutes that says, "Tell me which of my friends are within 10 miles and want to get together at a pub," right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
That 15 minutes, they've already got the code, they're ready to go. They're not going to do it. They're never going to do it.
There's no economic incentive for them to do it.
Exactly, right?
Their incentive is to keep you in their platform as much as possible.
And to keep you separated, because that's the problem with technology intermediated community, is this temptation to put yourself in between the people, to capture that sort of essence of their life, their community life together, whether or not it's your love life or whether or not it's your, other forms of community life. The temptation for the platform provider is always to get in the middle of that relationship and try to extract value from the middle. And what that does is that drains the relationship of the life-giving connection that the people are after. And so, we're dealing with these technologies that both give people enormous life and connection and need in communities. They give us what we absolutely have to have as humans. And at the same time, when they're badly implemented, they can really alienate and separate us. And so that's the core problem. If I was going to talk about one thing, that's the core problem that keeps me up at night and that keeps me in this field, keeps me working on this.
Yeah. We're talking to Josh Fairfield, who is from the William D. Bain Family Professor of Law at Washington University School of Law. I just like saying that; it's just fun.
Yeah, it rolls off the tongue.
But and talking a little bit about sort of the impact of AR, VR, XR on online communities. Just kind of getting into that conversation about online communities. I wanted to ask you. So, I draw a line of distinction between what I think you were alluding to, like online, like the big social media platforms, like Facebook or even LinkedIn, here where we're streaming. I will often jokingly refer to them as the metastasized outgrowth of what real online communities were, which were discussion forums and places where people could have meaningful connections and conversations. I refer to them today a little bit more as like cozier communities, places where people really do have a reason for being there, and they're not surrounded by the distractions and the flashing lights and the loud blaring noises of those platforms, which are, as you said, incented to keep you in the platform and to keep you a little divided, to make you angry even about things like. Do you see? I'm kind of setting up the question in a way to hopefully say, yeah, I see a difference. Like, but don't feel like you've got to say that. Like, I'm intrigued. Like, honestly, like, do you see a big difference between those large social platforms and the kinds of smaller communities that brands or nonprofits happen to have, and how they're set up?
Yeah, absolutely. And you can see it in I mean, look, mandatory disclaimer. Of course, people through big social networks can, and I want to not oversell this, can find legitimate human connection, can form legitimate human community.
Sure.
I've met many of my closest real life friends through that. But the difficulty is that there's no, and this we can begin to talk about, but there's nothing to form the community. There's no boundary there of inside, right? For people to come in from the cold. There's no way for people to come in. There's no walls for people to come in from the cold. And so people just kind of drift in and drift out, and you don't really have that sense of closer community. But we can tell from people's reactions. So study after study shows that people leave the big, I love this term, metastasized communities. They've broken their cell wall, they're loose. Those big communities, study after study shows that people leave their interactions with those communities drained, alienated, and exhausted. And yet my experience of early online community was absolutely the opposite of that. People engaged, drawn in, energized. They'd turn the computer off and be like, yes, we accomplished the raid. We built the project. We did the thing, right? People would, oh yeah, I figured out, like, I was really stuck on this project, and somebody who had real knowledge on this, they came in and they really, like, they didn't have to spend an hour and a half today helping me out on this, and they did. Those interactions you get from these cozy communities, and it's the risk of talking to a professor. I wrote that down. The cozier communities, the committees, and here's I think the big difference. The big difference is reciprocity. Humans need feedback in relationships. We become horrible to each other if we think we're just meeting each other for the first time. If we think we're never going to see each other again, like in airports, right? People just act terribly in airports a lot of the time because they think, I'm never going to see any of these people again. I don't have to be my best self. That sense of a place, the reason why a virtual place, such a crazy phrase, virtual place. But the reason why a virtual place matters so much is because it acts as a magnet for reciprocity. People keep coming back to that place, but what they're really there is to find the repeat interactions with people that really begin to enrich and make community better. And the more reciprocity you've got, the more people are decent to each other. The less reciprocity, the sort of more metastasized and open-ended and like an airport, people drifting in and out you got, the less people are going to be decent to each other.
I love that. And it brings me back to what I often come to as sort of the core definition of online communities is that it is that place that has a defined purpose or set of values, so that means that there needs to be a sense of what that place is and what it's about, that there's a fit purpose defined for it, where people come back again and again through progressive self-disclosure, develop an affinity for each other, and they want to keep coming back to further the discussions of that hobby topic, of that health issue, of the product that they all love. It doesn't matter what the social object is. But matters that people feel that sense of connection to it. I wanted to, we've got a couple of neat comments that have already popped into the feed here. I wanted to add them to the mix. Welcome to Bob Britton. He talks about anonymity within virtual communities. And this is very interesting. The anonymity of virtual communities is addictive to many people. They falsely assume they can take on a different persona and say things online they likely wouldn't say face-to-face. Amen to that. What they forget is that the internet is forever. Yes.
Yep. Oh, that's true. And, it's interesting, even a little bit of, we used to call it pseudonymity, right? the idea that you can't really escape and be anonymous. You can, however, create a pseudonym. But even that begins to create this reciprocity where the person's tied to their identifier, right? The worst communities are the ones where nobody knows who anybody is and where everybody's just doing whatever they want. You get reciprocity from knowing you're talking to the same person, and you get that repeat play from knowing you're talking to the same person. And so, yeah, I think people forget that really it's just a simple of, like IP address search, and you're fully identifiable to the owner of the platform and probably to anybody. Look, I'm a lawyer, so I don't want to get too into the legal aspects of it, but if people think that they can't be reached and identified for purposes of the law, they're just wildly incorrect.
Right.
There's nothing easier.
Yeah, and I mean, there are certainly communities that I've been with and which I currently do serve in a consulting capacity where the anonymity of the members is protected because of HIPAA laws, personally identifiable information, financial services. Like there are protections in place for those individuals.
Yeah, and for healthcare, I think that's particularly important. There are other places where people are seeking intimate resources or what have you, and they're just not going to do it if they can't protect themselves. And it's a key component.
So I want to delve into sort of the big topic of the conversation here today. I know we're going to probably continue to circle around these questions of identity and virtual place and sort of what all of that means. But I think through the lens of this particular branch right now, it's not maybe the sexiest conversation. The big sexy conversation is around AI and LLMs and that world, and I'm sure we'll touch on it. But this question of augmented reality, of VR, like virtual reality spaces, or XR, which I guess is sort of the blanket term or the more umbrella term around this. I think Mr. Zuckerberg actually had a cooling influence on this when he tried to go with Meta, and everybody had almost an allergic reaction to what he showed.
Yeah, right.
As sort of this wooden world with
the uncool has arrived. Right.
Yeah. But I mean, these virtual worlds have been with us, as I think you rightly said, for a long time. Like certainly in the gaming realm, where you have 3D virtualized environments. Where people can kind of wander around, with or without a headset. We should probably make a distinction between fully immersive and semi-immersive, kinds of environments. It's all still virtualized worlds. I can go to secondlife.com today and still, wander around a virtual landscape. I don't have to have a brick attached to my face to be able to see and enjoy those kinds of spaces or those kinds of experiences. But something you said earlier in the conversation that your early interactions, and sort of like what we emerged from was a text-based, virtual experience, virtual community experience, to something that where the internet is told in pictures and now told in video. Yes. I know you're grappling around this. You've got a book that you're working on right now around this. Can you tell me a little bit about sort of what prompted you thinking about this around this particular technology and sort of where your head is these days?
Sure. So there's so much to say there, and I want to just get the most important stuff out cleanly. But and when you said it's an unsexy conversation to a lawyer, when the conversation gets unsexy, that's when the lawyers get very excited, right? When we're talking about the cryptocurrencies are going to cause law to wither away and lawyers are fairly bored with that conversation. When you say, our local banks are replacing their check settlement network with a permissioned crypto network, lawyers get very excited, right? So when we move from and I love the magic swords and spaceships, but when we move from the magic swords and spaceships versions of virtual worlds to it is now our everyday experience that people need to be able to visualize the kitchen that they are making when they're building their new house, and they're building it in a virtual environment, which has now gotten seamlessly integrated with the kitchen designer at their local store. That's when the lawyers get excited. when it's become mainstream and part of our everyday experience. So the book that I'm writing is called The Social Con. It's a play on the social contract. It's how we've been let down by these environments and what we can do to build better community in these environments. The major point that's related to extended reality and virtual reality is that, and this goes all the way through to AI, is that basically humans don't act like humans unless we're in an environment. We act most like ourselves in an environment. I'll give you a real basic example of this. This is the core of the privacy problem online. You ever had that moment in the middle of the night, you're walking down the stairs, maybe in your house, or you're walking out of your bedroom, and you swear you see someone outside the window? That hair stands up on the back of your neck. That immediate, visceral, cold prickle breaks out across your skin, right? Now, imagine the reaction that you have, and I'll tell you something you've already known all the time, which is, this is a smartphone. Everything that you say and do is largely being tracked, recorded, and parsed through this thing. It is the technological identical equivalent of a person standing outside the window of your house. We don't have the same reaction to it at all. It's invisible to us. We're not evolved to be really, really worried about it. And it's taken us 20 years for people to finally get the message and people to finally begin to start being concerned about it. We still don't have effective privacy regulation in the United States. The point here is humans act with respect to things in their environment in terms of love, hate, connection, disconnection, discord. We react completely differently to things that we perceive as being there. It just goes to anything that's there goes to the top of our list. When the surveillance is there, goes to the top of our list. When the surveillance is not really there, it just falls away from us. And so what we're talking about when we're talking about extended reality, virtual reality, we're talking about triggering the most basic set of human instincts. Humans aren't going to react as if something's there when it's not there. That's in the simplest sense why the kitchen designers create a virtual environment for you to see your new kitchen, because you react to it and buy it on a completely different level than you would if you just were sort of imagining each cabinet kind of separately and looking at a list of numbers. You're just not going to get excited in the same way at all. You're not going to get excited in the same way about clothing unless you can see how it fits you. You're not going to get excited about, about like an event in the same way unless you're drawn to it and you've got these overlays that give you information about it. And so that's the ongoing, the enduring power of these things. They're not for the computers. Graphical interfaces have never been for the computers. They're fine with binary. It's for us. It's for our computers. Right? If you think about, for example, the visual sense alone, think about walking into a networking event, walking into a room. Your visual processors are processing enough information to stump a supercomputer, but it's all visuospatial. It's all who's talking to who, what's the feeling in the room, where they're, and you think about then most online meetings, all of that information drops out. Without the environment, all of the information is gone. And you can see it even simply in the difference between teaching in a virtual world versus teaching on Zoom. We all had to teach on Zoom during the pandemic. And what I noticed was what my students lost was they lost the side conversations. The conversations where one person at the desk would turn to the person beside them and go, "That's not right," or whisper, whisper the case name to the person two down in front of them, or turn and face each other and begin having a back and forth there. It wasn't that I couldn't project my information to the students. Like, I can do that with a PowerPoint deck. I don't even need to be there. It's the sense of being together in the room that really changed it.
I really love that. And a couple of things I just wanted to react to on it. So that sense of a place that there needs to be a there.
Yeah.
It sounds like a soundbite from the news. Like, there's no there. Well, there has to be a there. Otherwise, I can't react to it. Like, I think about one of my earliest experiences with VR back in the late aughts, I think. I had a chance to, actually strap on one of
Mhm.
those early
Right,
headsets and see
right.
like a virtual roller coaster, experience. And
Mhm.
like you really do, like you have a physiological reaction
You
to
do.
that
You
space
absolutely do.
when something is that close to you. And I think that when we have um, this is something that brand based communities struggle with an awful
Mm.
lot. How do we make it a there? How do we make it
Mhm.
a place that is visceral in and of itself? And so many community platforms are set up to be customizable to an extent, but
Mhm.
there hasn't been enough of a sense of like of place of it being a fit environment. It's like your iPhone, right? Like it blends into the background. It's all,
Right.
or if you haven't like sufficiently defined the reason, like why I want to be there, what's in it for
Mhm.
me, what am I going to get out of being in this
Mhm.
place, then I'm not going to have a reaction to it as a place, and
Yeah.
I'm not going to feel
Yeah.
as connected to it or as grounded.
Yeah.
So it's one of the reasons I get a little bit excited about this idea of creating more virtualized environments
Yep.
where I can wander through what seems like a physical space. I can enter a room and I can meet you in
Mhm.
that room, and I can see that there are other people in relation to me around me.
Mhm.
We can have conversations. They can see that I'm talking to you and you're talking to me, but they're on the
Right.
periphery, or
Right.
maybe there's a couple of us, sitting around in a group. The technology is not just now getting to a point where that um, virtualized proximity, or
Mhm.
simulated
Mhm.
proximity has been created, and I think that for me, represents some of the promise of what AR/VR technologies can maybe offer us.
Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, proximity is a huge one, and it's interesting. So, just a few design points here, since you were saying communities struggle to do this, and the one is to use virtualized stuff that unless there is a there, people won't react as if there is. If you want people to be acting toward each other as if they're in a close, cozy environment, you got to give them a close, cozy environment. Like it's not rocket
Right.
science, but it does seem to really be like hard to get across for sometimes. Um, but the other thing is that like proximity can be multisensory. So one of the best ways of doing
Yes.
proximity in a virtual environment is audio. You can
Yes.
do audio fade off for a conversation that's far away, and people think, why would you want the fade off? If I want to have a private conversation, I want it to be private. And if I want to have a public conversation, I want it to be public. Why spend the time? Why did Second Life or other virtual environments spend the time to create this sense of fade off? And it's because it lets you have this very natural, very important, think about like being at a networking event. Do you want fade off? Yeah, you do. You want a lot of conversations to not be occupying your direct framework. You want to be able to do the work, have the conversation you're having. That's fine. You also want to be aware of what people are saying in the room, broadly speaking. You want to hear that murmur that goes through. You want to hear where excitement's gathering and things like that. And you kind of keep half an ear on that too. So it's one of these things where you can use multisensory input to create things like proximity, and audio proximity turns out to be one of the most deeply seated things that we care about.
I had a very visceral experience with that. About
Hmm.
I think it was back during the pandemic when I started looking at some of the virtual community style platforms that are. I think it was Tapio or something like that
Mhm.
at the time, and they had architected in such a way. It wasn't really even like a fully like. It wasn't even like a full 3D video environment. It wasn't like faces on a screen like Zoom. It was set up almost like a game board, like you're moving pieces around the
Yeah,
game
yeah,
board,
yeah, yeah.
and they had laid it out in such a way that when you spawn into that community, when you appear in
Mhm.
that space, that you are brought into an environmental area where there's a bottleneck, like
Yes.
the room that you have to go through.
Yeah,
You've got to go through this
yeah,
room to get
yep.
into the bigger
Oh
virtual
man.
environment. And the design for that was kind of brilliant because they had the community manager plopped on a virtual couch in the middle
Yeah.
of that environment. And as I was walking through that area, stars in my eyes, like, wow, what is this all about?
Right.
I hear in my ears in the headphone, like out of my left ear, saying, "Hey, Todd, glad you could make it today." And I was
Yeah.
like, who is that? And
Right.
I had that immediate reaction of like
Yeah.
looking,
Yeah. Right.
you
Right.
know,
Right.
and
Yep.
that experience was very powerful. And for me, that was like the moment of like, wow, yeah, that's, this is going to be the future of how we do these kinds of community experiences. It's not going to, I don't know that it's going to be text first. Like right now, all the communities that we have, all the social media platforms we have, for the most part, predominantly seem to be very text first experiences.
Yep.
And what's the future hold? Well, I think virtual first and then text as maybe a backup, for what we end up with.
I mean, if you think about how we are as a species, we were virtual first and then text, right?
Yeah.
But I think the other, the other two things that you mentioned that are, and I see we've got a comment here saying, Go Brunch is becoming very popular. You can build virtual rooms that form digital proximity. Yeah, that's exactly the kind of thing. And I want to build off of that and say, there's two mistakes people make when they try to build virtual rooms and virtual proximity. The first mistake they make is that they make it too big. They think there are too many little cul-de-sacs. There are too many rooms for people to go into. And what happens is your people spread out. You want it cozy. You want people in close. You don't need to make too much. The big example that I gave is was from like the early game World of Warcraft. Early on there was this city, and there was a city for each faction, but it turned out that everybody picked one city, Ironforge. They picked one city because that's where there were enough other people, and that was it. That was the only thing. The other cities basically were ghost towns. They were too big, and I can't tell you the number of ghost town virtual environments I've seen. So that's the one thing, is when you're creating a room, make sure you created a cozy room, and don't make too many places for people to go and separate out. You want them kind of in around each other, and that's what fade and proximity is great for. People can go off into the corner of the room, have a conversation, but they're still a part of the overall whole. They can still be seen, even if they can't be easily, off the top heard. And so it preserves that sense that, oh yeah, this is a populated space. There are other people here. There's a reason to be here. It's a big one. The second mistake is you got to let people look good. This is the part that Zuckerberg got wrong. People have to be able to look good. It's a crazy thing to say, right? We're all in business. We're all trying to just do our jobs, and people just let it fall by the wayside. But looking good matters. And when you do, the meta's big problem is it looks like Minecraft. The metaverse doesn't look good enough to draw people in. It's just not exciting. It's not interesting. So anyway, those are the two big things that I think come to mind as design principles when communities, when community platforms are trying to create these spaces. They make them too big, and they make them too stripped down.
Well, this is a cardinal thing, the cardinal issue that comes up even with text-based communities. Today that I work in, especially a lot of larger brands have a tendency to want to create many forums, like a forum for each one of their products that they want to do at the very outset, like because they've seen examples of other communities that have all of these things built out, but they're not thinking in terms of these things emerged over time.
Yeah. Oh man, absolutely.
That question of social density, like what you were describing there needs to be enough people in one place to start having those interactions and concatenations that lead to value in conversation.
You're absolutely right. I should have added that one. Follow your customers, follow your citizens. They will try to start creating communities. The worst thing you can do is to say, no, you're doing it wrong. Here, let me break you guys up into the appropriate discussion groups, that kind of thing.
We want you in these buckets so that we can track you and who you, right?
Right. Like, forget it. No. What you do is you build features around where they are. Absolutely. Boy, that's so important. Yep.
Yeah. And that's very interesting. The question of looking good. Everyone on the internet is busy flexing, how they look. And I'm reminded of, like things like Ready Player One, and everybody's got a skin, right?
Right.
But it's true, like that idea of being able to being able to not, and it is a matter of sort of looking good, but it's also a matter of, can I represent myself as I want to be seen,
Yeah,
in
exactly.
online
And I
space?
think
And
people who are trying to represent themselves as serious economic players don't appreciate being turned into goofy cartoons, and so on and so forth. Like, I think it's a real, when I say looking good, that's a proxy for letting people represent themselves the way that they want to come across, because they can do that. That's a real life feature set, right? If you were to say one thing about virtual environments, it's this: we're trying to create a lot of the real life feature set that works for us here. The difference is we want to do it with distance eliminating technologies. We want to do it with intermediated technologies to bring us closer together over basically long distances in time. And so, but we forget all of the technological features of real space. When we took people away from kitchen tables and put them into Facebook chat rooms, we lost most of what makes a kitchen table conversation worthy of having a conversation. We missed why people choose, of all of the rooms in the house, the kitchen table to have the conversation. We just think, oh no, we can transplant this conversation anywhere. No, you really can't.
No, absolutely. And like, yeah, if I had my ability to create virtualized world environments, like the kitchen is probably one of the first places I'd want to try to recreate. Around that. But then how do you create that kitchen? Like I recall in one of our previous conversations, we went down this rabbit hole to some extent, where I was like, well, how do I recreate that sense of the kitchen? Because the reason people come to the kitchen is because there's a sense of comfort. There's food there. And so that, everybody gravitates to the kitchen because that's sort of a center of energy in the house, for people to be together, because they feel cared for in that space. It feels a little more intimate than a big dining room or, a big meeting hall or something like that. But like, what is that same magnet or anchor when we come to virtualized spaces? Like, how do we create that? So I'm very fascinated by the idea of like sort of physical architecture and how we pose that into virtual worlds in ways that are meaningful enough that the brain clicks and sees it as a environment that we want to be in.
Well, I think that there's a real advantage and then a real risk. So once people say, "Oh, wow, I get it. I've been trying to take people out of kitchens and dump them into chat rooms. Here's what we got to do. We got to recreate the kitchen." And that has an advantage in the sense that now your eyes are in the right place. You're looking for the reasons why people are acting that way, and you're trying to give them real reasons to act like that in your community. At the same time, right, if you're trying to recreate all of the features of a kitchen in a virtual environment, I mean, you can't, right? You can't get specifically, why are people in the kitchen? Because it's warm. Why are the people in the kitchen? Because there's food, right? Like those are some things that you can't deliver. What you're looking for is what's the right level to say, what's drawing them in? How do I recreate that? And some things you can, like, I'll give you an example. Scandinavia had this whole slow TV movement where people would watch a cozy living room fireplace burn down over 8 hours, right?
Neat.
Now, that you can absolutely put, and I'll admit, like, after I heard about it, and yes, we do have 2 fireplaces. Like, it's not like I'm not capable of building a fire, but I'll admit, like, I tried it out, and I put that on our big screen TV just during one Christmas and just kind of left it there. And my daughters, man, wham, they were just in that room with the Christmas tree and the fire. And so there are some times where you can do it directly, but if you can't do it directly, then you're looking for the ways of creating that same sense and that same feeling.
Is that something, it occurred to me, is that something like what we're getting where you have Twitch channels where people are playing like Bob Ross painting shows, like
of
in the
course.
background, or,
Of course.
or somebody's getting on and they're coloring in a coloring book and you're just kind of hanging around with them chatting. It's that sense of casualness and
well, and so that's a huge important point to make then also, which is the community you're looking for isn't always inside your digital walls. If you've got a place, if you've got a there, and you draw people into it, what can happen is then people begin to form community around it on the outside, right? They begin to come into the physical room where the virtual community is interacting. The number of times where people from an online group have been a part of a real world celebration, right? You've got your friends from around the world. Like I just turned 50. So you've got your friends from around the world who are joining in your celebration. That overlap and designing features that make it really possible for the virtual community to spill out into real space is one of the most powerful ways of getting people comfortable with it. Literally letting them be in their kitchen while they're doing the virtual community.
I love it.
Can be an amazing overlap.
So Josh, and we're kind of running a little lower on time here. I wanted to just change direction slightly. We've been speaking with great excitement about the potential for these spaces. But as someone who studies and practices law, what are some of the legal or even ethical implications for setting up these spaces for let's say you're an enterprise or a brand or a nonprofit organization? If we're setting up like virtual spaces beyond even sort of the text-based communities that are ubiquitous right now, what do I need to be thinking about in terms of policy or protection for my organization?
Okay, well, this is great. There's a few real basic ones. Let's start with what I'll call real economic harm. So real physical harm can happen. People can get swatted. There can be real physical danger, and companies do need to be aware of that when somebody's sort of threatening somebody else through one of these communities. But more than that, companies think that these spaces are super real. They're super real. They're so real until they don't want them to be. And when they don't want them to be is when they're trying to pull the plug or take toys away from people or take things away from people that people feel like they've earned. And that argument for years and years has sort of been nothing. You don't own anything. You can't really invest in this virtual community because we need to be able to have the ability to take it away from you at any time. And that has become more and more risky. It's still a valid move if you're going to hand people, like toy party favors in a virtual environment. Like, I mean, the real answer online is hats. Everybody loves hats. So people, like Team Fortress 2 built its entire business model on hats, letting people, buy different hats and skins and things like that. But if you let people buy hats and skins and things like that, and they've spent real money on it, and then you say, hey, now we're going to take them all away from you, especially if you don't close the community down at the same time, that can really provoke a very strong response, because people will respond. And I know this is shocking. People will respond as if you're taking away something that they really have, really value, and really own. Like, if you've been successful, then you've been successful. And so with the rise of things like cryptocurrencies, NFTs, and other virtualized value, people can get really, really upset. And that is a significant legal risk that can transform into lawsuits when people have something that they value taken away from them. So the answer to that is if it looks mostly like a toy, you just keep it on the it's not real side of the spectrum. You put it in your end user license agreement. You say, no, this is just a representation. Yes, we gave it to you, but it's just an account. It's not a real thing. Where the legal risk comes in is if you're trying to draw people into your community by saying, hey, when you buy it, it's yours. Mm-hmm. That kind of stuff is a powerful magnet. But if you say it, you need to mean it. So that's a big one.
Mm-hmm. Because people will attribute value to that.
They will. And when they attribute enough value, right? I mean, NFTs before the crash were, going for millions of dollars. And when a lawyer hears the word millions of dollars, they're like, yeah, sure, I'll find a way to make that lawsuit happen. Mm-hmm. A second big one, and here's the single biggest systemic legal risk. And it goes along with artificial intelligence. And the risk is that there won't be law. So if you think about what happened with the social media revolution, and even with Google made this really radical statement, said, we own all of your search results. That wasn't evident. To say we own all of the digital traces you leave behind when you use these technologies. We get to use them and there's not anything you can do about it. That was a legal argument that nobody really responded to as if it were a legal argument at the time. It's like a company saying, we found this new continent, we're just going to clear cut it. And everybody else said kind of okay, and they went along with that. The legal risk here is AI is very much doing that. The economic model of virtual communities is largely to extract information from the people who are using them and use it to train intelligent models, whether that's through targeted behavioral advertising or whether you're training AI to interact in the space, to procedurally enter the space, to be a chat bot. That person who said, hey, welcome, I'm so glad you could make it. These days, that person would be virtual, right? This model relies on this. We found a new continent. We're clear cutting it. This model relies on a legal argument that's not enshrined anywhere in law, which is, as the owner of this community or as the owner of the platform, I get to extract all of the data of the people out of it, and I get to resell it for AI training, and I get to use it in my own community for AI training. I can't tell you how fast I've seen law and regulation develop faster around one technology, which was cryptocurrency, right? Like, I mean, a lot of cryptocurrencies were like, we're free, we can do whatever we want. We can bribe cops, we can buy drugs. And the legal response was, bet you can't. And some people went to jail real fast for that stuff. Yeah. And technology is now trying to make that move fast and break things, fast move like Google did on search traces, only they're trying to do it on community data. And worldwide, I think people are having a very different reaction to that. Regulators are having a very different reaction to that this time around. So a lot of companies, and this is emphatically myself included, I was a technology entrepreneur. I helped start Rosetta Stone, the language company, ages ago. I get it. You build companies fast and you let the regulators catch up. I understand that. But be very aware. This time, it's not going to be one of these hands-off, we'll make it all okay later on kind of thing. Like Spotify, right? Spotify built its business on copyright infringement. And then, if you remember BearShare, LimeWire, right? Like that was the competitor. And then they started licensing it, GrooveShark, and then they started licensing it to stay ahead of the regulators. They became legit fast. That is a risky move with AI. It's a risky move to say, okay, we're going to just build it fast. We know there's no regulation in place right now. By the time there is regulation, we'll bring ourselves into compliance. That's a riskier move than it has been for prior technologies that have moved quickly.
So the chat's been going a little bit strong here. A couple of comments. Great to see some new friends on the stream here as well. Christine Dunbeck, a quick shout out to you and to D'Angelo, David DeWald. David's one of the early pioneers in the online community space. He was just kind of offering a couple of comments here. That we need some basic data privacy laws, but that's a trade-off many of us understand. It's free to use. Yep. You are the product being sold. Yes, for sure.
Yep.
So, Josh, I know we're kind of winding down our time here, and I feel like we could come back and talk about do a multi-conversation series around community tech. And definitely want to have you back on the show, for some more conversations. But I know you're working on a book right now, the social con that you mentioned a little bit earlier in our conversation today. Do you want to talk a little bit about that and sort of what's inspired you and sort of where you are with thinking about that social contract as it impacts on our virtual spaces that we live in?
Sure. So the line that I think will help center this is this happened a long time ago when I was at a constitutional law conference. The big social contract of the modern era is the United States Constitution. We're one of the oldest democracies. Obviously we've got our problems, but we've made it this far. And that document is sort of has been an example and a template to countries around the world. And I stood up at the conference and said, in terms of real life impact, what really matters to us, The dominant social contract of our time is not the United States Constitution. It's the Facebook Terms of Service. That in terms of our real life impact on us, we've moved our lives into these virtual communities and these online spaces. We're more governed by what happens there in many cases than we think about things like, your ability to speak freely, right? That whether you think that free speech has gone too far online and misinformation and disinformation are rampant, or whether you think it hasn't gone far enough. I don't care where you fall on the spectrum. I just want to point out what you can say is far more determined by these community terms of service than they are by any legal document that's out there. And so when I looked at that, and when I looked at how our national discourse and how our sense of community was falling apart, people are alienated. People feel very distant from each other. There's all these books, Bowling Alone, right, that have come out again and again saying we're drifting apart from each other. What's going on? And what the book says is, look, one major culprit is the whole range of technologies, from platform social communities to artificial intelligence, which, when deployed correctly, as we've been talking about, really build connection. But what can build connection and closeness and reciprocity can also be designed to tear it apart. And what I tried to do was then find, what are the 3 characteristics of communities that let them build the kind of future that we need? Because one thing I noticed was, it's not just a problem that we're alienated from each other. It's that it's in conversations, in community, that we build our sense of the future, that we, E.O. Wilson, noted bug guy, entomologist, said, ants and bees can't upgrade their social software. Ants and bees can't just guillotine the queen and declare a republic, right? We can. That's how we stay ahead of our constantly changing technological environment, is we upgrade our social software. And we upgrade our social software in conversations exactly like this one, in groups exactly like this one, in communities exactly like this one. And what we've noticed is that people are so desperate for a sense of community that they're joining online communities that are just tearing us apart. You can feel the anger and the outrage and the separation, the toxicity. And so the center for the book is, there has to be an opposite to that. I've seen the power of these communities to build us closer together. I've studied it for 20 years. I know we can build communities that generate a sense of, when you sign off of it, you feel like you've connected with someone. When you sign off of it, you feel like you had a productive, like this, you feel like you had a productive conversation with a friend. It's really like the sort of thing that we're doing right now. That feeling that I know these technologies can deliver. And that when we do deliver it, what's going to happen is, again, what we're doing right now. People are going to have real conversations about how the future of our country and our species works. And we're going to come up with the ideas, the big ideas that are going to help us live together. And that's what law is, right? Law is just simply, how do we talk about, it's all words, law's all words. How do we talk about how we want to live together? And so to me, the future of online communities is the future of law. It's the future of how we decide that we face the technological challenges of the future. And the 3 characteristics are pretty straightforward. For good, healthy communities, there needs to be a degree of shared values, that you mentioned that early on. That really brings people together. And also, and this is gonna cut in a different way, you have to bring people from a broad range of cognitive tools to the same shared values, right? You can see this in corporate environments all the time. I have no problem making money. People say the shared value is profits. And the broad range of tools we bring in are consultants and economists and psychologists and computer programmers. And it turns out that those people build better products and come to better solutions. This is research done for Google on like why some teams win and some teams lose. And they said, yeah, this is it. You have to have shared values and you have to have a broad range of tool sets. You don't want just the same person again and again in your community. You want to draw together a bunch of people. And then the last feature you want is, you want to have the ability for good ideas to come to the top. You don't want to have this top-down hierarchical authoritarian structure where you say, no, we're going to do it this way, we're going to do it this way, we're going to do it this way. You also don't want chaos and anarchy. What you want is a way for good ideas to float up and for people to support them, and then for those ideas to be put into place to evolve the community and make it better. And I think those three features are the ones that I found. If other people have other features, please send me an email or open a conversation. I'd love to have a conversation with you about it. The book's still very much in progress. But yeah, it's about identifying the opposite of the horrible communities we've seen online. It's about creating that early sense of promise in the technology and in how we can use it to do things like this conversation that we're having right now.
I love it. Josh, you've perfectly articulated the reason why I'm in this profession and why I love conversations like this. These are the original promise of what the internet was supposed to be at the outset. If you read the Clue Train Manifesto or any of those early optimistic documents, that we do have the ability to create uplifting conversations and to design experiences that make sense. David DeWald had some great comments down here as well that he added in, but really beautifully articulated as well into the whole thing.
Yes. I mean, what I'm reading here often is only through the serendipitous encounter with another kindred spirit that we awaken to the profound interconnectedness. That is 1000% the deal. Yep.
Beautifully said. So with that, I think we're out of time here. It just flew by so fast. I always enjoy my conversation.
It always does. It always does. We'll just have another talk.
We must do more. Yeah, absolutely. And for those of you who tuned in or catching this on the replay, thank you so much for spending your time with us. If you made it to this point in the conversation, which I don't see how you could have helped, but stick around with us, through this, because it was a lot of fun and very insightful. You can, catch us every other week on Talk About Your Community, where we try to bring in lots of wonderful perspectives and ideas about community building. Our next event is going to be on Friday, August the 23rd. I'm going to be joined by a colleague of mine, Christine Pearson, who is a subject matter expert around customer experience, building great customer experiences. We're going to be talking about the connections between customer experience and building great online communities. In that conversation, look for that on the Clocktower Advisors company page on LinkedIn or up on YouTube, where you can be notified of the upcoming session. In the meantime, Josh, thanks so much for spending your early morning with us from New Zealand. Really appreciated that. Appreciate you and all you're doing. We'll look forward to having you back again. In the meantime, for all of you out there, have an excellent weekend. Take some time for yourself, relax, reconnect with the outside world, get away from these screens for a little while. And we will see you back here in a couple of weeks. Kalisa, let's roll the credits.